Okay, so we're starting with doing something that's just taking, a basic portrait photograph, make it into something that is more about mark making or something painterly. And you can do that in a lot of ways. The most straightforward way is just pushing pixels. Now, certainly you can do it by maybe building a portrait from scratch, using a photograph as a template or a guide, create like a white empty layer below it, and basically just trace whatever you have here and build up paint kind of matching the colors that you have there or not matching. That's one way of going about it, just building from scratch. Here what I'm going to show you is taking a brush, and I'm using a brush with a little bit of rough edges, adjusting the size, right? And then I'm not using actually the brush tool, I'm using the smudge tool, because literally what I'm doing is pushing pixels. Make sure that some of these things here aren't on, because they can radically change, what you're doing with the brush. So basically, again, the smudge tool, which is under the sharpness tool or blur tool, you're basically just pushing pixels like that, okay? And in a sense, it's just taking pixels that are already there and kind of changing the nature of them. And maybe, in a sense, if you have painting experience, it might make a little bit more sense to you than if you don't, soft edges, hard edges, and so on. But basically, and this is actually fairly low resolution. I mean, really, as low as you should be going is maybe 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. I wouldn't go any lower than that. So you can see how the surface is changing. I can change the size, and basically, if you change the size of the brush, you're also going to change the level of detail as you do that. And, if you do this, I mean, the most common thing using the smudge tool when students get into it and kind of do this for the first time is that it looks too photographic, that they're really not taking enough chances and not really radically changing the information that's there. Try and experiment a little. Definitely, like right now, I'm probably using too small a brush. Put yourself to a point where it's not as comfortable, and you're definitely pushing pixels in a way that kind of is challenging. The other thing about this is, hopefully if you have some painting experience, using the painting skill to kind of mimic what you would do with a traditional media brush. That is you're kind of like, it matters which way you're pushing the brush. It really matters. It matters that kind of you're working with the surface, and you're changing directions, not pushing in the same direction the whole time. Try even taking a larger brush and taking a highlight, something that's maybe a little bit more subtle, making it stronger. So there's definitely a lot that you can do, and you can take color from just about anywhere, especially when you have the strength up really high to let's say 100%. You know, you can push a little bit of a dark around pretty much anywhere you want. You can pretty much stretch color pretty far. So if you can go a little bit larger with your brush, you know, and maybe now I've made marks that I'm not crazy about the way they kind of merge. You can go back over it and maybe make some points a little bit softer, you know. Again, it's still just pushing pixels. So if I need to go back in and make things softer, kind of integrate some of the brush strokes, I can. And integration is going to come up a lot, and integration, you know, especially even the very first thing that you're doing, integrating digital marks with traditional marks, and it's just about kind of getting them to interact, really letting one affect the other. And you can try in a lot of cases just mimicking what you do with traditional media with digital media and see how that works. In a lot of cases you get interesting results. But anyway, change the pressure, change the brush that you're working with, change the size of the brush. All those things kind of affect what this looks like, you know, and especially how painterly, or if you wanted to do very decisive mark making, you know, maybe using 100% with a very particular kind of brush, maybe something really simple even, and just making marks that are very repetitious, you know. That's kind of hard sometimes to make work. I'd rather personally be working with the irregularity of something that feels a little bit more like a natural brush. And again, 100%, it, you know, it's harder to do, much harder, because you don't kind of have soft edges to play around with. Sometimes 100% is a little bit more like what people's true experience with paint might be like. But here, of course, you know, you kind of have the option to make it a little bit or a lot easier to deal with. Again, just don't be too timid. Make sure you're pushing yourself, and you know, you can always go back over things. Just be willing to take chances. Okay, this time we're gonna do something a little bit different, give this kind of a different look. Again, it's kind of conservative compared to what you could do technique wise. You know, it's a certain way of using a mask, and it's interesting. For those of you who aren't as familiar with using masks a lot, hopefully it'll help there too. first thing I'm going to do is go to kind of using black and white, and we can change that in mode. We can change it to grayscale or layer adjustment, just desaturate. I'm going to change the whole thing to grayscale. It does make your file smaller, easier to work with. And then in terms of brightness and contrast, I'm going to use Legacy, which means the old contrast. It's a little bit stronger. And we want to try and get our middle grays a little bit stronger too. So sometimes for something like that, you might even need to do other adjustments like image adjustments, shadows and highlights, you know, number of different things. Shadows and highlights is one. You can go in here. Let's keep the shadows dark, so you don't want to change them. Leave them at 0, but we can actually make the highlights a little darker by changing that. And the brightness, you can kind of lower, raise. So we got a little bit, and we can do the same with the midtone, darken or lighten. Shadows and highlights is awfully useful. Okay, so we got some good darks to work with. Now, what we're going to do is, first, before we do anything, we got to make a brush for what we're going to do. It's going to look kind of like pencil marks, and the brush that we're making is going to kind of look like pencil marks. So first, to create your own brush, you want to create a new file. I'm doing this basically from scratch. And this new file, we want to set up in pixels. We're going to do 200 by 200 pixels. Okay, resolution doesn't really matter. Grayscale in terms of your color mode, and create. Okay, does look small, but it's all relative. And now we want to take, you know, to make a brush, you gotta have a brush or a pencil, doesn't matter. We can use the pencil tool or the brush, but we're going to use something really small, 1 or 2 pixels. So let's do 2 pixels. All right, we want just a simple brush, 2 pixels, black. Your spacing you can always play with later, but basically you want this just to kind of look like hatch marks. I'm going to uncheck all of these. We don't want smoothing. We don't want any of those things to get in the way. So basically you just want marks like this, and that's my brush. Okay, we can do other ones with different lines. You know, you can fill up that square however you want. You go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and we'll call this Pencil Marks 1. All right, and I'll go right up here. So that's now on your brush settings. You can see what it looks like life size. You can see what the spacing does to it, and you can separate it so you're really only doing those lines kind of one at a time, you know. But we're kind of automating my pencil marks, my little hash marks, you know. So let's go back to our other file now. Okay, we got that brush saved. You can see the size in relation to this file. Here's where the mask comes in. All right. First of all, I'm going to double click on the background. That changes it to a layer so we can do things with it. I'm going to go to layer and duplicate my layer. I want to duplicate. You'll see why. It's just going to help as a guide for me. I'm going to take layer 0, right? And we're going to create a mask there. That's the layer that we're going to use a mask with. But since we're going to be covering up a lot of what's on layer 0, we need something besides what's underneath there right now, which is below layer 0. There's nothing, just transparency. So we want to create another layer, okay? And in this case, just go to new layer, create a new layer, and we're going to fill it with white. All right. Right now, again, it's transparency. We can go to edit, fill, contents white, 100% opacity, fill it, and we'll pull it down. After it's filled with white, we'll pull it down underneath layer 0. Okay? So we have a white layer. This layer, which is the image we're going to work with a mask, and then a duplicate of that on top of it, which is just going to be for reference. So first of all, layer 0, the working layer. Let's create a mask. We'll go to layer, layer mask. Basically, a layer mask accompanies the image. It's another part of the layer. On a layer mask, you can paint with any painting tool you can use on an image. The difference is you're always just painting in black and white. And essentially what you're creating in a layer mask is a pixel map. A pixel map in black and white. And in this pixel map of grayscale, anywhere where you have black, the pixels are going to be 100% transparent. Anywhere where you have white, the pixels are going to be 100% opaque. And again, that relates to the image here. Right now, everything in layer 0 is 100% opaque. If I create a mask and it's a black mask, it's going to make all of those pixels 100% transparent. That's not a permanent thing, of course. That's why we create a mask. Because a mask is flexible until you apply it. So let's go to layer, layer mask, and reveal all means a white mask, which would keep things 100% opaque. Hide all is a black mask, which means right now, when I do a black mask, there's the black mask. I'm going to turn off the layer above. Layer 0, basically all those pixels become transparent. So again, layer 0, all the pixels on layer 0 are transparent. But remember how a mask works. If I switch my foreground color to white, and I take the brush, right? And let's just use a regular brush for a minute. If I paint on here with white, again, I'm on the mask is selected. If I paint on here with white, that's what shows up. So again, we just switch the color to black, and we paint over the mask with black. Now what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to use that brush that I created. Alright, here's that brush I created. Actually not 200 pixels, 170. Pretty close. You can see if I space it out, I can space it out to the point where I'm really only doing this many marks at a time instead of them being bunched together. Most brush strokes are, you know, kind of individual shapes, kind of compressed, bunched together. I want to make sure that white is my foreground color, and probably to start, we can start with 100%, or, you know, let's go down to 75%, and we make marks like that. You can see the marks vary a little, and we can also change direction of them so that they go in a different direction. We can change the size of them. By separating, you know, one set of marks, I can put them down almost, you know, similar to the way that I would. It just, you know, one at a time. It's just that we're working with like 15 at a time instead, which does speed up this process, of course. So let's go from a little bit more of an angle like this. So what do we see there at this point? Well, really nothing yet. But if we turn this back on and lower the opacity, you can use that as a guide to essentially, oops, wrong layer. You can use this as a guide to essentially, you know, where you're working, what you're going to see. So if you can kind of vaguely see what's underneath, right? And I'm gonna lower this even more. Lower the size even more. And let's move this to a little bit more of straight up and down, you know, which it's pretty close to. And of course, if the opacity is lower, it's going to take more marks. I'm on the wrong layer. Let's do that again. So again, make sure you're on the mask. So right now, it's taking a few more marks. Lower the opacity even more. Change direction. And you can build up marks really gradually. Let's go a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter even. And as you build up marks, you know, we can turn off this reference layer. And you can see, you know, an image with a sketchy quality. You're not doing any of the rendering, so you can just kind of focus on technically what you're doing with this particular tool. So let's turn that back on, and you know, there's not that much variation built in, so you kind of have to vary it. I'm going to do a lot of marks there, but I don't, again, I don't want to build up a whole lot of marks in the same direction. So I'll change direction, change size maybe a little bit, change the opacity, the flow, and build up a few more marks. turn off that reference layer and again see how it looks. If you go too strong, too quick, you're going to end up with something that just looks like an effect on a photograph. You really want to kind of take your time, you know, change things up fairly often, and don't go in with too much opacity too quickly. Again, as I said, change directions pretty regularly. You know, it's the type of thing that really is kind of up to you what you do specifically. I'm going to change the size again. I'm going to change the direction again. I'm just saying, you know, my viewpoint is kind of what's going to work in terms of looking like a drawing to some respect, or a sketch, something that has a feel maybe other than a real typical filter. Let's take away the reference layer again and see what it looks like. Yeah, so, you know, you do want to find a balance where you feel like you're starting to get enough of kind of a semblance of what's there, you know, but not so much that like it really starts to look photographic. And again, you know, I'm using all the same brush. I would encourage you to experiment with different brushes. Another thing that you can do is flip Y, which kind of just puts it upside down. Whoops. Flip X, which is horizontal, which in this case doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And, you know, if you want, one thing that really helps to kind of pull an area together is do some very light, very large marks. So I'm going to lower the opacity and go over an area a bunch of times with some lighter marks. That might help to kind of pull an area together. But again, you can use multiple brushes. That might take a little bit more time, but you might get a little bit more out of it. Now, like I said, if I go in with a brush with a lot more opacity, what's going to happen is you're going to get something that looks too much like a photograph too quickly. So, you know, at a certain point, you might be able to say that you've gone too far, you know, and you've lost a little, maybe by getting too much of a likeness, or getting too much of the original. It's more interesting to kind of leave some things, and you can see especially in here, I'm getting a lot more of the photograph. And maybe too far, hard to say. It depends on what you're going for. You know, again, let's go straight up and down. And you can go pretty far with this technique with a lot of different things. You can try, take some marks, make them really large. That's maybe very, very large, but you get the idea. And then gradually from there, do them smaller. Let's change direction a little. Smaller. Smaller. And smaller. So, you know, all kinds of things that you can do. This is just a particular technique, and this is heavy on technique, but when it comes down to it, you really have to have a feel for drawing, just like with the other technique I showed you, having a feel for painting, direction, having a little bit of experience going into it definitely helps.